this is going to be a little bit of just showing you the slides, but I already touched all these concepts. So this is just a graphical view so that maybe it will cement it better. You'll see it better. So we talked about central nervous system, right? And the myelinating cells are called oligodendrocytes. They're slightly different in shape. They're different in their connections, right? In the peripheral nervous system, we saw there was Schwann cells that were causing that isolation layer. The node of Revenir is here for the saltatory conduction, right? Same thing for the central. What is Schwann cells and oligodendrocytes made of? They're usually made of fat called sphingosine, right? So they have backbone. They make ones. So you see these hydrocarbons, right? Hydrocarbons are found in fats, and the sphingomyelin is what is a predominant fat found in both Schwann cells and oligodendrocytes, right? So fat is insulation. Now we see this is unmyelinated, but remember I said even though it's unmyelinated, the neuron is not like this, right? Remember I was saying even though it's unmyelinated, the neuron was like that. And in actual myelinated neurons, what we see, right, is surrounding like this, multi-layers. So multi-layers. So this is multi-layered. And we need that in order to not allow the conduction, right, through these junctions here. So unmyelinated would be this. This would be number one, let's say, and number two is myelinated. This. And we see this propagation, right, how it goes from node to node, because the nodes is what has the sodium and potassium channels. And its action potential is much, much faster, right? Now, here we see the actual speeds. Speed is much faster with saltatory conduction found in the neurons that have the myelin sheath around them. The openings between the sheath is called nodes of Revenir, right? And this is where it synapses to something else, another neuron or target site, right? Right. So here we see another demonstration how it works. This is because multi-neurons. This is oligodendrocytes, right? We see the unmyelinated neurons, and this occurs in the disease states. They could get demyelinated, right? So this is normal neuron conduction, right? Normal cell, right? How does the Schwann cells form? They basically invade this neuron and they multi-layered sheaths around it, right? So Schwann cells, and it will basically keep turning around it, forming this protection site around it. And here, this is unmyelinated neuron. Why is it unmyelinated? Because you have openings. You see how it's not fully enveloped? How there's these openings? See how the axons are not fully surrounded? If they're not fully surrounded, it's going to be unmyelinated, but it still has Schwann cells around it. Demyelinating, right? So let's talk about Guillain-Barré and talk about multiple sclerosis. So here we have diseases that are caused by your immune system that's inappropriately acting. So your B cells of the immune systems, right? They secrete antibodies against sheath. So depending on where it is, central nervous system versus peripheral nervous system, it will have different effects, right? So here we see the Guillain-Barré syndrome. Primarily target site is the peripheral nervous system. So the peripheral nervous system, the antibodies that your B cells make, they're going to demyelinate the system, right? So this was normal cell, and this here shows you the neuropathy that is associated with the damage. Here we see the multiple sclerosis, the MS, the B cells, they're primarily target oligodendrocytes. So they will target here oligodendrocytes on the CNS, the central nervous system, demyelinate the right cells. What happens is sclerosis, usually you have weakness of the muscles, ataxias, right? And sure, you have other symptoms as well. In Guillain-Barré or GBS, you have ascending, right, weakness of the muscles. If it hits your respiratory system, you may lose the ability to breathe, and you get placed on the ventilator. How do we treat them, right? How do we treat them? So patients get electrophoresis. That's, we basically take their plasma and we try to get rid of all the bad antibodies that the body makes that are targeting those cells. We also give them immunoglobulins from the healthy cells to get healthy antibodies that will not attack their sites. So here we see, right, what happens is there's an injury, right? Myelin degenerate, the fragment degenerates, right? We see these macrophages that are eating up these debris, right? But afterwards, we have axon, right, reforming the myelin sheath. So they will reform the myelin sheath, and the person will regain the function. So that's why we say in those cases, place them on the ventilator, control their respiratory status, plasmapheresis, get rid of all these bad antibodies, right? And give them good antibodies with immunoglobulin therapy, and the body will recover, it will regenerate myelin sheath, and the person will recover, right? So these are some innervations that go over to different locations. We kind of touched upon this, right? Some things, some stimuli do not need to get integrated all the way up to the brain. You have an interneuron pathway right here in your spinal cord. So you sense a painful stimuli, it gets interpreted in the interneuron, and you have, right, it's right away. When you touch something hot, the response is going into the interneuron, and you get rid of it. We talked about this, the sensory neuron and the responses, right? So the amplitude does not increase, right? You don't get the bigger, the frequency of it increases, right? And this is back to the right normal or decreased state. So the amplitude does increase, the frequency increase, right? We see this similar action here, right? And this is different responses. These are often checked if you go to a neurologist and you're having some sort of a weakness. They will look at these responses and your reflexes with right? They will trigger and see what you do. A normal response essentially contract the muscle. So the contraction of the muscle is what is the normal response. They checking all these nerves to see that you have a proper stimulation. In the ambulance, you will not be doing most of these. Babinski reflex, you're doing, right? That's the lower motor neuron. If it's intact, normally the foot should curl, but if you have the toe that's extending, it's an abnormal response, usually indicative of lower motor neuron damage. Right. And the final aspect of it that I want to talk about, we talked about the CSF production, right? That's in your brain. It cushions the tissues. But the very important thing about the CSF production, right? The CSF in itself has a pH to it. So this is also what's controlling your respiratory centers, right? Remember that formula, CO2 plus H2O makes carbonic acid? And then this dissociates into hydrogen ion and bicarbonate. And this hydrogen ion, right, the pH essentially that's in the CSF solution, which will trigger, right, your respiratory centers to increase or decrease their rate of breathing in relation to the pH of the blood, right? In the pH of the CSF, I should say. This is the CSF production and the control, right, of these tight junctions in the brain for breathing regulation with the pH changes. We talked about the white matter and the gray matter. So and the ascending and the descending tract. So I think this is all been covered. What's here, right? So different portions of your cortex have slight effects. So you have speech centers, you have visual centers, right? auditory centers. We usually check those things, right, when we are doing an assessment, especially somebody comes in the hospital for possible CVA. The neurologist will do a very extensive assessment. The corpus callosum is the area in the brain that communicates the two hemispheres together, right? So the two hemispheres come together, the corpus callosum, and they integrate the information there, right? We also have these tracts, right, and fibers, the association fibers that essentially bring together, right, the entire portions of the brain and how they communicate. Here we see commissural fissures and fibers that have communication between two hemispheres, right? And we have these anterior commissures that communicate same hemispheres together. These are the cranial nerves that originate from your brain. You didn't see any extensive questions on this, but the cranial nerves, you want to be familiar in terms of just the basic functions. They impulses, right, sensory and motor responses, and they have specific responses that you could see here. Again, I didn't see any specific questions. Neurologists will often test all these cranial nerves if they believe there is abnormalities, right? Olfaction, sight, coordination, and so forth, right? So all of them are listed here. And we talked about this already, right? The receptive field 1 and 2, where the actual stimulus comes in. This is the nerve fibers, the mechanoreceptors that pick it up and impulses to either sensory where that information is integrated, processed, and then you goes to the motor pathway to essentially perform its function, right? The mechanoreceptors we talked about are here. There's also thermoreceptors for regulation of temperature that you feel. Chemoreceptors, there's baroreceptors, right? The function in terms of what they're sensing is different, right? Chemoreceptors, gradients in the ions channels, pH changes, right? But in terms of the response, it will integrate the response back to the central nervous system, and the central nervous system will interpret that information that's being carried. Yeah. So all of this we spoke, right, increases in frequency when there's heightened response, return to normalcy. Here, this shows you the innervation of the skin, right? How the sensory nerve fibers extend into the skin. That's why with skin chapter, if you have burns, right, the more deeper the burn is, you may lose sensation to that particular area. So you may not feel, right, when the stimulus is applied. The other important thing I want to end with, right, we see the cortex here. So the impulses, they decussate. They means in your spinal canal as it goes down, they switch from right to left. So essentially, your right side of the body controls. So your right side of the brain controls your left side of the body, and your left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. Why this occurs? Because your tracts decussate. They switch. The decussation means they switch, right, in the location, right, how they move, and the actual innervation to the muscles, it becomes on the opposite side of the body. That's why if someone is having a CVA, let's say on the right side of their head of the brain, they will have left side weakness. Vice versa, if they have, let's say, left side CVA, they'll have right side weakness. Why? Because these motor nerves, these tracts, they decussate, they switch, right, location in the spinal canal, right? And that's why we see that. So that's why we note that when we're assessing a person.